majority in computer land this morning. Coffee and pajamas, sitting in your cozy living room or on your bed still. Um, but for those of us who have braved the fog and the elements, we are here in the flesh. Hope to bring in a happy new year, and to do that with some interesting story time this morning. We're going to be exploring some of the deeper background of the New Year's celebration, why we celebrate New Year's. And then we're going to look into really experiencing sacred space and sacred time, which actually is kind of the heart of why New Year's is celebrated in the first place. You know, when we're thinking of our present day, we oftentimes repeat these practices like we saw with our Christmas stories, that we've lost sight or touch with the roots of why we do what we do. And the rituals that we perform are oftentimes, very diluted and distorted views of what was once a sacred act or a ritual, or maybe even a shamanic psychedelic voyage in the case of Christmas. But with New Year's, we're going to see, with the help of Mircea Eliade, a historian of religion, how the ancient peoples viewed New Year's as a way of not only restarting the year, as we oftentimes think of it, setting new resolutions, putting away the old bad habits, but also to get in touch with the realm of the gods, so to speak, to enter into a direct communication or participation with the mystery that is behind space and time. And so I hope you're up for that voyage. We're going to have fun with it. We're going to be not only exploring the ancient past through Mircea Eliade, but we're also going to be looking more fast forward in how this New Year's celebration is played out in the epic poem Savitri by Sri Aurobindo. I think you'll enjoy just the beauty of the language of Savitri. And then we're going to finish up with the view that's taken by the Tibetan tradition, Tibetan Buddhist tradition by Tartan Tulku. And we'll see that in just a few minutes. So before we do begin, we're just going to ask you to get to a place where you can maybe even close your eyes, find your breath, relax. And just take a moment to take a fully conscious inhale. And a fully conscious exhale. Just connect to that immediate rhythm of the breath. And recognize how we are intrinsically, naturally plugged in to the pulse or the rhythm of nature through the breath. Just allow the breath to find its harmonious flow so that your mind becomes more open and relaxed, your body more spacious. And you can continue with your eyes closed or listen with your eyes open, whatever suits you best. But the real takeaway from that practice is to find and realize the rhythm that is at the heart of your own life or existence, that nature is rhythmic, nature is cyclic, that your breath comes in and your breath goes out. That is the quickest experience of rhythm that we are consciously aware of. But all of nature at every scale is rhythmic, cyclical. And so we woke up this morning and our circadian rhythm is now at the opening of the daylight portion. And we're going through that 24-hour circadian cycle. And different hormones and neurotransmitters, etc., are released through the body and brain. And we are naturally plugged into a circadian or 24-hour rhythmic cycle. And we do this daily, collectively. And we know also with nature that women have been plugged into the moon or 30-day cycle. And that is at the heart of reproductive life. And so this idea of cyclical procession is something that the ancient peoples were well aware of. In fact, they were mapping this from the earliest strata of recorded history. I don't know if you're ever familiar with the book Hamlet's Mill. It's a difficult read, but it basically documents how these ancient people built their sacred sites and temples and monoliths and pyramids with a keen understanding not only of the rhythms of the heavens, but of what's called precession, or how zodiacal or astrological signs change every 2,400 years, and we enter into different ages or yuga cycles. And so we have these rhythms, like I said, that are scaling up from the very simple and direct experience of breath to very vast rhythms of cosmic space and time and cosmic cycles. And so we are now, as you know, approaching, if not entering, into the age of Aquarius, the next cycle within the precession of the equinoxes. And this will go on until you can see that they've mapped out what's called the Great Year. And the Great Year is when we go through all of the stars or all of the signs of the zodiac, and that is a 24,000-year period. And the ancient Vedic peoples and Plato and the Greeks, they've mapped this out, that we will undergo a 24,000 great age or great year cycle. And these cycles keep expanding as we go into higher ranges of perception. In fact, it was the Vedic peoples that were so keen or insightful on mapping this out, and they did it with such, what should we say, mind-boggling symbolism. So I want to explore this just for a little bit. And if you hear these big or foreign Sanskrit names, don't worry, they'll be explained. But according to the Vedic astrological and astronomical and cosmogonic cycling, in other words, how the cosmos was born, this is the story that you get in some of the Vaishnava traditions, the traditions centered around Vishnu. And so we have what's called the Mahavishnu. Mahavishnu, or Great Vishnu, is a portion of the Supreme Being that lies down in the cosmic ocean. And he goes to sleep. And the sleeping God starts dreaming. And his dream is emitted from every pore of his sleeping massive form. You could even see artist renditions of this online. And each pore emits bubbles or effervescent universes. And each bubble is an entire universe, and there is just countless universes being emitted by the sleeping, dreaming God. And so within, if you were to zoom into one of those bubbles, there's another form of Vishnu inside of that bubble at the very base of the universal creation. And this is Garbhodakshayi Vishnu. And Garbhodakshayi Vishnu is laying on the cosmic serpent, or Shesha, and he's getting his feet massaged by his consort Lakshmi. I told you this is fantastical. And Lakshmi is massaging Garbhodakshayi's feet, and he's chilled out on the back of Shesha, the cosmic serpent, and out of his navel grows the cosmic lotus. And upon the top of the lotus, as it blossoms, is Brahma. And Brahma is the universal architect, or the creator God. And when Brahma opens his eyes, the universe comes into being. And all of the jivas, or separate souls that will incarnate in countless forms of species like ourselves as human beings, are now taking their cyclic rounds within this universe of Brahma. And Brahma opens his eyes, and that opening of the eyes, like I said, is the dawn of creation. And for 14 trillion years or so, Brahma is opening his eyes, and then eventually Brahma will close his eyes, and the universe will all come back in, and there's that grand cycle that the universe has gone out like a breath, and the universe comes in like an inhale. And in between, there's all of these other cycles going on. And so we can get in touch with that sacred moment or sacred dawn when the creation first emerged. And that is what the ancient peoples were really after when they were looking at the new year. And so I wanted to explore this idea with Eliade's help. This is the book, The Sacred and the Profane. And this is some interesting stuff that goes on here when he's talking about the nature of space. So as the title of the book says, sacred and profane, that there's sacred space and there's profane space. And we're going to see how that all ties into the new year. With sacred space, he says, you can look at it in terms of a modern city. And when you go inside of a church within that modern city, you cross a threshold. We've said this many times in the service. And what Eliade says is, for a believer, the church shares in a different space from the street in which it stands. The door that opens on the interior of the church actually signifies a solution of continuity. The threshold that separates the two spaces also indicates the distance between two modes of being. The profane and what Eliade here is calling the religious. The threshold between the street and the church is the limit, the boundary, the frontier that distinguishes and opposes two worlds. And at the same time, the paradoxical place where those worlds communicate, where passage from the profane to the sacred world becomes possible. And so what Eliade also shows, based on his anthropological studies, looking at human life and civilization, that not only is this happening at the church level, but it happens, when you build a community or when you build a home. And he's saying that, when you build a home, oftentimes it's that same idea that you're going from, the everyday busy life to a more sacred, peaceful sanctuary. Oftentimes we have a rule, you take your shoes off at the door, you don't bring the outside in. And that's kind of the idea, that we have a threshold or a barrier to our homes that are also supposed to be, according to these ancient beliefs, another expression of the temple. That's why oftentimes the early homes in more traditional societies to this day have home altars. And so when you come in, this is also the domain or the home of the God of your family, the God of your choosing, right? Your Ishtadevata, the one that you want to worship. And so this is another way of saying that we are replicating this pattern at every scale. Again, with the way that we divide sacred from profane space. And then he says, on the most archaic levels of culture, this possibility of transcendence is expressed by various images of an opening. Here in the sacred enclosure, communication with the gods is made possible. Hence, there must be a door to the world above, which the gods can descend to earth, and man can symbolically ascend to heaven. So there was always this vertical opening or communication link, whether it was the home altar or the church or the temple, there was always a open blending or an openness to the transcendent level in the higher world or sacred space and sacred time, right? Every sacred space implies a hierophany, an eruption of the sacred that results in detaching a territory from the surrounding cosmic milieu and making it qualitatively different. So in other words, your home or your temple becomes sacred because there is what Eliade is fond of calling a rupture or a break in plane. So this is going to be really important when we get into our Tibetan Buddhist readings. We're used to living in what's called profane space. Our profane space is our everyday life. And for many moderns now, there is no rupture of plane at all. We are in profane space. And a contemporary of Eliade, Joseph Campbell, when he was asked by Bill Moyers in that famous interview, The Power of Myth, what does it look like when people live without this opening to the transcendent? He says, read the newspapers. We are just off track because we are not aware of or sensitive to or open to sacred space. Sacred space has at best become a myth, something that was, a immature, backwards belief that we have now successfully evolved from, right? But the idea that we're looking at today is that we have this sort of a corpse of a holiday where we're celebrating New Year's without rupturing the plane, without piercing the membrane of lower space and opening to the transcendent or great space that is where the communication of the higher self and the lower self can merge and thereby begin again a new year, a new cycle, a new creation, right? This is the idea that we're hopefully aiming at this morning. Then he says, something that does not belong to this world is manifesting when you open to the transcendent. And it manifests beyond all shadow of a doubt. Like this is what, the ritual or the meditation is designed to do. Not only open up conceptually to the transcendent, but actually have the confirmation or the direct experience of the merging of the lower space with the higher space, secular time with sacred time. And he says, in doing so, there is a new orientation and a new course of conduct is determined when the lower space or the human being experience opens to the greater space or the divine experience. Something intrudes or invades or interrupts our secular space personally. And that's the idea behind New Year's resolutions. Like we want to clean up our life. That's the idea of the burning bowl. You want to take what was in your secular or lower space that's not working, that's not serving you, that's not sacralizing your life in a way that opens you to the bliss of divine being, and you want to burn it up. You want to get rid of it. You want to transcend it. You want to offer it to the gods. And so this is the idea that once you do that, you're asking for this intrusion or this direct experience where your life then takes a different course because a new inspiration has come in. Right? Isn't that what we look for when we do these rituals? We're looking for not only the ending of the old, but some kind of a propulsion, an inspiration, a vigor that will bring us more successfully into what we're looking to manifest, looking to embody as the new year approaches. Okay? And then he says here, just in passing, the sacred is preeminently the real. It is at once power, efficaciousness, the source of life, and abundance. Right? So when we want to set these resolutions, we are wanting to open to the power, the life, the abundance, the efficaciousness, what's going to actually bring that about in our experience. Okay. And then he says something also quite telling. He says, life is not possible without an opening toward the transcendent. Think about that. Life is not possible without an opening to the transcendent. And so for many of us, like we were saying, in our modern world, we are so tuned out. We've tuned out the transcendent. And we've tuned in primarily the materialistic, the finite, and the limited. But unconsciously, we're still open to the transcendent. That's why in the Seth material that we study weekly, one of the things that I'm fond of recalling that Seth says is that we are always creators. We never stop creating. But for many of us, we are unconscious creators. And because we're unconscious creators, we keep creating what we don't want to see. That this is one of the reasons why we do that personal inventory on New Year's Eve. Why you write down what you don't want to see anymore, so you don't keep creating it. No one's doing anything to anyone. We're generating it based on our beliefs. It's always to ourselves that we must look because we're doing it to ourselves. So when we recognize the sacred and the profane in our own belief system and we start to really work on ourselves consciously, we will burn up whatever is depleting, depressing, painful, illness-ridden, dysfunctional, toxic, etc. We won't tolerate the ideas that generate those behaviors and experiences. Seth goes as far as saying that not only do your ideas generate the behaviors and the experiences, but it also generates your environment and the people that show up within it. You're such a all-encompassing creative agent, and unconsciously so, that we're not aware of how vast and all-consuming, all-pervading our consciousness is. That we are influencing what appears to be outside of us. And as we approach sacred space and sacred time, we will realize there is nothing outside of us. Like, that's the big travesty of being in lower space or secular space and secular time. It's all fragmented. It's chaotic. And the ancients knew this. That's why whenever they established a temple or a sacred site, the serpent represented the chaos. And so they would nail the head of the serpent at the center of the design. They did this in India. At the center of the design of the sacred space, they would nail the head of the serpent as a ritual to say that this is where the timeless, the eternal, the harmonious intersects. It's not chaos here. And so that then forms what's called the axis mundi, or the pole or pillar of the world. It's where time and eternity can meet on that vertical axis. And so this is where chaos can stop and the lower space can open to great space. Now, what's beautiful about these teachings is they can be taken from the external to the internal. And so one of the things that you'll see a lot of in yoga, especially if you read Autobiography of a Yogi, is that your spine is the axis mundi. Your spine is that vertical pole that connects the eternal, the crown chakra, with time, all your lower chakras. So you're literally the sacred temple in human form, walking around. And for many of us, when we are unaware and unconscious, we are not accessing these higher capacities and abilities that would link us back to eternity, to that calm, to that healing, to that harmonious life. Okay. So Eliade says this: just as a church constitutes a break in plane in the profane space of a modern city, the service celebrated inside marks a break in profane temporal duration. So in other words, the space of the street and the church is broken. The secular space or the everyday life in the space is broken when you cross the threshold into the church space. You go from profane space to sacred space. When you enter the church, another dimension of the sacred, the dimension of time, is also altered. You go from profane time, which is thinking of your little life and your little ego and all of the things that you do out there in profane space, and you open to the fact that you're actually the imago Dei, you're the image of God, you're the embodiment of the divine mystery. And a different thought process, a different narrative, a different symbology enters your listening and cognitive functioning while you're in church. And what it's designed to do is literally fertilize you so that you conceive the divine child, the Buddha nature, the Christ child within you. That's why the church, the early Christian churches were the womb. You would enter the mother. You would enter literally the womb. And you would be given the word, which is, logos spermatikoi, the divine emission. And you were then impregnated with the mystery. And the mystery would then grow in you until sacred space and sacred time became your natural state. That was the function of the church, right? This is what he's saying. And so it takes you out of historical time and historical space. And now we get into the holiday aspect of it. He says the cosmos is conceived as a living unity that is born, develops, and dies on the last day of the year, to be reborn on New Year's Day. So again, within the calendar, the sacred calendar of the ancients, the first day of the universe is New Year's Day. The death of the universe is December 31st in our calendar, and so we celebrate the rebirth of the entire universe today. And so as we get these concepts and these symbols, you can see how we can utilize them to trigger an event within our own consciousness. Like, that's the power of ideas, that we can actually plug in to a communication that literally will link us back to the heart of creation before time. This is the idea of liturgy, or the idea of ritual, or the idea of entering into the fellowship of the church. We've encrusted it with a lot of modern concepts and doubts and cynicism and other beliefs that have really marred or clouded the original intention, which will increasingly get clearer as we move along this morning. And then he says, we shall see that this rebirth of the cosmos is a birth that the cosmos is reborn each year, because at every new year, time begins anew. The intimate connection between the cosmos and time is religious in nature. The cosmos is to cosmic time as the year is, because they are both sacred realities, divine creations. So then he says, and again, he uses the term religious man. We can say for the spiritually minded of the archaic cultures, the world is renewed annually. In other words, with each new year, it recovers its original sanctity, the sanctity that it possessed when it came from the Creator's hands. Okay, this is Eliade's telling of it. So in other words, it's ever renewed. And what we're going to see when we go into the Tibetan tradition, it's so much more than that. It's every instant it's being renewed. And if we have time, you'll see how within that tradition of Tartang Toku, this great High Lama of Tibet, he's basically teaching you how you can open up every experience that you're right now having to great space and great time. You can make your concepts, your body, your breath, your emotions, your belief of being here, your belief of the future, your feelings of the past, they can all literally become translucent and porous and open. And you can literally allow the radiance of great space and great time to merge into your felt experience, because you're opening up the opaque, disconnected beliefs and feelings and images that we just habitually, unconsciously continue to process. But we're actually at that moment point where we can become completely open to the newness, the rebirth of the entire universe in this instant, by letting go of those old patterns. Right? This is the idea. So then he says finally here, this is why the new year is the occasion for purifications, for the expulsion of sins, of demons, or merely of a scapegoat. Right? All from the ancient culture he's speaking from. For it is not a matter merely of a certain temporal interval coming to its end and the beginning of another, as a modern man, for example, thinks. It is also a matter of abolishing the past year and past time. Indeed, this is the meaning of ritual purifications. There is more than a mere purification. The sins and faults of the individual and of the community as a whole are annulled, consumed as by fire. So he's basically saying the end of the cosmos before the rebirth is one big burning bowl. So this is why, when we do a ritual, if we don't have that cognitive, deeper psychological focus, it could just be an empty gesture. But when we layer in these deeper meanings, it can be earth-shattering, literally. So this idea of the rebirth of time and sacred space is really at the heart of all traditions. I mean, if you look at the end of the book of Revelation in the New Testament, it's the old things have passed away, right? The sea, the ocean is dried up. The ocean to the ancient Hebrew mind represented chaos. It's where all the dark monsters would come from. No more sea, no more ocean. A new heavens and a new earth, a new temple has come down from heaven and restored sacred time and sacred space for all the families of the earth. This is the great cosmological rebirth that we see as the crescendo of the ancient Judeo-Christian symbology or tradition. It is woven into the heart of every major tradition. And what we've looked at, again, is the Vedic as another expression of this. And before we get into the reading of Savitri, which is a more modern take on the ancient Vedic tradition of India by Sri Aurobindo, just a little bit about Aurobindo, just a rare spiritual genius, a political revolutionary. You've probably heard me talk about him before, and had the vision and the experience, some would say, he would actually just say that's what his life was, is that we are going through these rhythmical cycles with a direction, that we collectively have gone through many different evolutionary epochs already. We've talked about this in Seth class as well, that when you're fertilized as a human embryo, you will recapitulate every evolutionary species before you come into being a human fetus. You will be the single-celled organism like an amoeba. You will then grow into an aquatic creature. You will then grow into an amphibious creature. You will then grow into a lower mammalian creature. And then you will emerge as a proper human fetus with the development of the neocortex going on, etc. And you will then look human. But within your structure of DNA, within the library of information that you embody, it's the entirety of creation. You have all of the information, all of the genius, all of the knowledge that's already come before. And what Aurobindo is saying is that we don't stop here. There is another emergent quality that we're all collectively going towards in these greater rhythmical cycles. He calls it supernature, or the Superman, right, back in the early 20th century. So the superhuman species is latent within our own DNA. And the poem of Savitri is basically saying that is the culmination of the New Year celebration. No longer will we have to even cyclically go through these ritualistic experiences. We will have now emerged once and for all in a constant communication with great space and great time. There's no longer the fall or the forgetfulness within the secular or lower space. We will have burned that away. Right? And so this is the preparations that we do when we come into the church. This is what we're talking about. It's to give birth to the new species within our own consciousness and to see the oneness or the unity behind the multiplicity, as we're going to see so beautifully stated in Savitri. But I do want to give you a little consideration of Aurobindo's genius. And this is taken from The New Species by Sat Prem. And Sat Prem was the confidant of the mother who was the consort of Sri Aurobindo in Pondicherry, India. Told you there's a lot of words here this morning. Hopefully it's still clear. So the mother says something very beautiful here. She says, let's see where to pick it up. Okay, so this experience, she says, once you emerge from the mental muddle, when things begin to clarify above and all around, we begin to live in an ever-renewed wonder down to the smallest detail. Knowledge we did not know we had, unthinkable precision, distances abolished, as if someone or something cared, really cared, to let us know everything we need to know, even in the most unexpected details. That's when you come out of the mental muddle. This is when the clouds part and you begin to really see your conscious connection with your higher self. And you're embodying this. In the minutest detail, everything is taken care of. And you're given everything you need to know when you need to know it. She goes on. This doesn't only happen in mental awareness, but tangibly in life, through living answers, as it were, and trivial little scenes exemplifying a whole slice of the world with a smile, as if through this mental clearing, the whole of life were coming to show us the answer. Nature becomes alive. When your mind clears of its false ideas, secular space and secular time, you'll realize you're in great space. You're in great time. You're in the pure land. And everything is speaking knowledge because now you have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. This is what she's saying. It's all done first within, through this mental clearing, the burning away of whatever is not aligned with your truth. Right? This is all part of the new year, by the way, right? This is all that universal message of what the ritual of New Year is supposed to do. So everything answers. It is a singular complicity between ourselves and the 1,001 things we encounter daily, as if they were all living a single life. How beautiful is that? One being recognizing itself in the most minute details. No ego commentary getting in the way. No mental muddling to interrupt the one organism that is constantly, instant by instant, emerging as great space and great time and great knowledge. And we're it. All living a single life. Let's start here again. As if they were all living a single life, knew one another quite well, and were sending little signals to one another. You see, that's how it is, most naturally and without any fuss, one life, in all capitals. One life. Then Mother goes on to say this. Sri Aurobindo, when asked how he had been able to write 5, 6 books simultaneously, if you've ever read one of Sri Aurobindo's books, they're massive masterpieces of the highest order, and he was writing 6 or 7 books at one time. So his mind is just very hard to grasp by normal standards. And this is Aurobindo saying in reply to him writing so many books simultaneously. This is what he says. I could have written 7 issues of his periodical, the Arya, every month for 70 years, and still the knowledge that came from above would hardly be exhausted. And so it is. The mother goes on. We are bathed in an infinite wealth of knowledge which knows no details. Everything counts, utterly, absolutely. Everything is interrelated. And there is not one thought in all that, unless we need to make speeches or write a book, for instance. In other words, she just said, there's not one thought in all of that. This total interrelatedness, this one life, this one organism, there's no thought. Whew. That's how we can experience it. Thought comes in as that time, secular time, and it begins to create the waves that break up the communication of the one life. There's no thought in this. She goes on. So everything is interrelated, and there is not one thought in all of that, unless we need to make speeches or write a book, for instance. The 1,000 imperceptible simultaneous threads, unseizable by the mind, which advances step by step like a donkey on the path. Right? The mind's a little slow. It's not able to compute and contain the vastness of the one life. It breaks it up by nature. It slices it up. It defines it. It fragments it. It labels it. It rips it from the unity in order to possess it or know it or understand it, but it's just lost it. Right? So the mind advances step by step like a donkey on the path. So all of these imperceptible threads, thousands of them, simultaneously going on instant by instant, are grasped by an exact super thought which reconciles the entire picture in the blink of an eye and guides you straight to the point through a virgin forest with millions of entangled branches. So in other words, to tie this together, because many of us are trying to get this through the thoughts, what we're emerging into, right, this great space, this great time, this great knowledge, which is the new year in its divine truth, we will have access to a greater capacity as we emerge from being so dependent, addicted to lower space and the thinking that goes on in lower space. The death of that cosmos needs to happen in us. And the rebirth would be the emergence of supermind, which is no thought unless you need it. And the vastness that would come through you would actually have you. Did you ever see like a hawk go through? Like Lisa was telling me this the other day. Like she saw a hawk going through a tangle of mangrove, chasing a bird, and it was, you can't fathom how at such speed that hawk can do that. No thought. And so there's that capacity within us that we will be able to harmonize this vastness, but from a different perspective, if you will, that is being called super thought in the teachings of Sri Aurobindo. And this all will happen in the blink of an eye, guiding you straight to the point, and everything is contained therein with a quality of order, a powerful and translucent coherence that's unseizable by the mind. That's why in meditation, it's always relaxing the mind, stilling the mind, entering the state of no mind, no thought, no self, no time. Right? In truth, she says, there is nothing the mind can do that cannot be done better in the mind's immobility and thought-free stillness. So you will be more productive, more on point, more precise, get things done quicker and more efficaciously when you're coming from a no thought, no mind moment. Everything will be given to you. Seek first the kingdom of God. Great space, great time, great knowledge. That's the kingdom. And then everything will be added on to you when you need it. All part of this rebirth of the cosmos that needs to happen in you on this day, the new year. But the mother says this, rather Sat Prem, but then why continue in the old mental groove if this next evolutionary stage, so much lighter, is meant to transcend it? And we'll leave that as an open question. Why continue in the old mental groove? Join us on Monday evenings, Course in Miracles, 7:15 p.m. Or Seth on Tuesday nights, 7 p.m. Why continue in the old mental groove? And if you act now, just, take a moment too and get the level of quality that is carried in these thought waves of the teaching, the Dharma, the Veda, the Torah. This is different. This isn't secular. This doesn't keep you in your little bubble. It's designed to open you up to the transcendent. And there's something within you that is already that, recognizes this as the love song, the voice of the beloved. So I want to, we'll probably have to end here. We won't be able to get too far into the Tibetan teachings this morning. But Savitri is the longest epic poem in English ever written. And if you recall, Sri Aurobindo was writing 7 books at a time, all of them masterpieces of philosophy and yoga. And he did this in a flash. He would write these out in a couple of months. This he worked on for 40 years. It's his great work. He would change a comma 15 times. It was the canvas of his masterpiece. And so it might not all make sense or register in your conscious listening, but just let the ideas wash through you, see how you do with it. So the first canto of Savitri, the title is, first book 1 is the Book of Beginnings. So this is all echoing the New Year motif. It's the beginning of the creation. That's what the ancients saw in the New Year, right? This is when the gods created, and human beings get to go back into communion with the gods, right? That's earliest days. They built the ziggurats and the pyramids and the temples, and they were literally cosmic mountains to go back into Olympus, go back into the realm of the gods, to celebrate the new year with or in the presence of the gods. So Aurobindo is, I'm sure, aware of this, and so his epic opens with the book of the beginnings. It's the cosmogonic creation story. And then the first canto is the symbol dawn, the new year, the rebirth. And we'll read just a little bit from this. And where we pick it up, it's the heavenly creations have taken place. A new cycle begins within the higher realms, and then that ray of divine light enters into the earth and starts the earth cycle of life. Okay? So this is what he says here. Then the divine afflatus spent withdrew. In other words, the divine fertilized the earth and then withdrew. Unwanted, fading from the mortal's range. A sacred yearning lingered in its trace. The worship of a presence and a power too perfect to be held by death-bound hearts. The prescience of a marvelous birth to come. Only a little the God light can stay. Spiritual beauty illumining human sight. Lines with its passion and mystery, matter's mask. And squanders eternity on a beat of time. As when a soul draws near the sill of birth, adjoining mortal time to timelessness, a spark of deity lost in matter's crypt. Its luster vanishes in the inconscient plains, that transitory glow of magic fire, so now dissolved in bright, accustomed air, right? Profane space. The message ceased and waned the messenger. The single call, the unaccompanied power, drew back into some far-off secret world, the hue and marvel of the supernal beam. Speaking of earth, she looked no more, or rather this was the goddess. She looked no more on our mortality, the excess of beauty natural to Godkind could not uphold its claim on time-born eyes, too mystic real for space tenancy. Her body of glory was expunged from heaven. The rarity and wonder lived no more. There was the common light of earthly day, affranchised from the respite of fatigue. Once more, the rumor of the speed of life pursued the cycles of her blinded quest. All sprang to their unvarying daily acts. The thousand peoples of the soil and tree obeyed the unforeseeing instant's urge. And leader here, with his uncertain mind, alone who stares at the future's covered face, man lifted up the burden of his fate. So sacred time, sacred space, the divine act, and then it's forgotten, and we start busying in our daily life, right? And then I'll leave you with just one more little bit here. On man, sometimes when he draws near to God, an hour arrives when fail all nature's means. forced out from the protecting ignorance and flung back on his naked primal need, he at length must cast from his surface soul and be the ungarbed entity within. That hour had fallen now on Savitri, so she can no longer pretend she's just in lower space, profane time. She had a breakdown. She had to give birth or come to realize the entity within, her deeper self, her higher nature. That hour had now fallen on Savitri, a point she had reached where life must be in vain or, in her unborn element, awake. Her will must cancel her body's destiny, for only the unborn spirit's timeless power can lift the yoke imposed by birth in time. Only the self, the higher self, that builds this figure of self can raise the fixed, interminable line that joins these changing names, these numberless lives, these new oblivious personalities, and keeps still lurking our conscious acts, the trail of old forgotten thoughts and deeds, disown the legacy of our buried selves. The burdensome heirship to our vanished forms, accept it blindly by the body and soul, an episode in an unremembered tale, its beginning lost, its motive and plot concealed, a once living story has prepared and made our present fate, child of past energies. So in other words, let's not drag around the corpse of our past, our family traditions, our hang-ups, our traumas, the things that we are holding against others, our grievances, our family curses and limitations, things that have held us back up until now. Let it all be used as a way to shake us out of the slumber of being the surface self. Burn that up and open to the great space within. Okay? Blue bag's going to go around. I know I ran a little bit over. If you're joining on Facebook or YouTube, you can donate by clicking the link below. Very grateful, the church and I, for your generosity. Hope that wasn't too heady for you guys. Any feedback? Thoughts, questions? No thought. Good answer. We're blessing that. Thank you so very much for your offerings. May they be used to bring light and life to all. And so it is. All right, my friends, we're going to seal the deal. Again, take a moment to return to that ever-present cycle, the rhythm of your breath. Know that it connects you to all the greater cycles within this pulsing organism called cosmos. That we are the cosmos. And feel the nature of your spine, illuminate it. This axis mundi, this communication channel. And allow that lotus within the center of the heart, along that spinal axis, to bloom and open. As a new beginning emerges in this moment, we are totally aware that the light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us wherever we are. God is. Amen. Try to sit in silence this week, at least for maybe 10, 15 minutes a day. Do nothing, think nothing. See what happens. Okay? Have a great day, everybody. Thank you. Happy New Year.